my screen. So let's have a go. This. Look at that, seamless. Right, I can't actually see any of you at the moment anymore. So if there is any problems, perhaps Sam, you can just turn on the sound and shout at me, and I'll I'll come back into the room. But I will I'll crack on. So really, just giving you a little bit of background. Last summer, Sam asked me to come down to St Mags to have a little look at the garden, and I was expecting him to basically, you know, ask for a few hints. He handed me a big wad of paper and said, "This is what we want. You know, what we'd really like to do something with this space, and the Inspire project. There is some funds to do something with the garden." So the big wad of paper was species reports and loads of stuff that had already been done, which was amazed, really. It's fantastic. And I'd not really explored the gardens around St Mags, but it really is a fantastic space. So that's how I got involved with this project. And so I did a design, which I'll show you a little bit of later on. And I've started, and in January, started implementing some of that design, and now working with volunteers, which is all very exciting. So this is me. Bit of my background as to how I got to the place of doing garden designing and interest in these sort of things. I did a degree in zoology, which also included botany and in ecology I graduated in 2004, and then spent 6 years working in Dorset on different countryside sites. So I was a ranger looking after all these different sites, and my main speciality was what's called conservation grazing. So I'd run herds of cattle, and I had Exmoor ponies and goats, and we would these animals would graze and help with the conservation of the area. By the way, I'm happy to answer any questions about any of these different projects at the end as well, if there's anything that particularly interests you. Moved to New Zealand after I got married in 2012, and my wife and I worked on 8 farms, 8 organic farms, learning practical permaculture. And I then did a permaculture design certificate a few years later to sort of solidify some of that knowledge. I've been a self-employed gardener for about 15 years now. And even when I have had other work on, I've still continued that as a bit of a thing that I've done on the side. Sometimes, like at the moment, it becomes most of my work, and at other points it's been a little less so. I will talk a bit about the Grow Cycle Urban Mushroom Farm, which is one of the things that I've done, and spent 4 years as a horticulture facilitator at the Dame Hannah Rogers Trust at Seal Hayne, which is a lovely charity that works with adults with learning disabilities. And at the same time as doing that, I was a lecturer in ecology and conservation and habitat management for Exeter University's distance learning. So it was all online teaching across. It's quite interesting, teaching to students all over the world for about 4 years or so. So that's a little bit about me. And that's just a picture of my outside my house. I just put it there. It's beautiful. Did someone say something? This is a Wisteria. This was actually planted at the same time my house was built back in 1914. So it's yeah, beautiful, and it's literally at the point of that happening at the moment. I love this plant. It does try to escape across the road every year though, so I do have to hack it back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start really by introducing some of the concepts, things like ecology, biodiversity, and permaculture, and I'll give you some examples. And then sort of the second half of the presentation, we'll really look at then how that fits into the St Mags garden. So ecology is the study of relationships between organisms. So that includes us, and it's the relationships between organisms and their physical environment. And it then seeks to understand the connections between animals, plants, and everything around them. So ecosystems. Now, as I said a bit before, I've been teaching this for a long time, but each time I run a course, I realize how much not much less I know, but how little I know, and how little as humans we understand the complex, incredibly complex systems that are within nature. And I think beginning to understand that, oh, we'll have someone here, so I'm going to just someone's admitted them, that's fine. Beginning to understand some of these concepts and the relationships between these organisms is vital, I think, in learning how to live lighter on this planet. And again, I'll speak a bit more about that as we go on. For some reason, it just, there we go. I'm going to give you an example, and this is always the example that I used in when I was lecturing as the first example, and I find this fascinating. It's a butterfly, the large blue, that has never been a particularly common butterfly in this country, but it became a lot rarer, and it was only through studying its life cycle that we really began to understand how we could save it. So this particular species depends very much on one species, larval food species, which is wild thyme, and it has what we call a symbiotic relationship with a species of red ant. Symbiosis is where two organisms live in a way they depend on each other. Now, this I'll sort of try and summarize the life cycle, but the adult butterfly, as it lays its eggs, it then on the wild thyme goes through these different stages. At one point, the caterpillar drops to the ground and exudes this strange smelling secretion that attracts the red ants to it. And the red ants actually at that point think that it's an escaped ant larvae, take it back to their nest, where the caterpillar then starts to eat all of the ant larvae, feeding on them. But the ants don't kill it because it in turn exudes another liquid that the ants enjoy eating. So there's this very strange relationship happening. After a few months, I think it says 11 months here, caterpillar then crawls back out of the ant's nest, expands its wings and flies off. It's such a strange relationship, and how that emerged, anyone, it's incredibly intricate relationship. But even more so, the intricacy of this, the reason that the species started to decline was because as changes happened in grazing with enclosure, that more grass started to take over, which meant there was less of the wild thyme, therefore less of the butterflies, but also it meant that the ants themselves weren't able to live in that environment. So not only did the butterfly reduce, but the ant reduced as well. So there was this, in order to actually conserve this species, it was vital to actually understand how it lived. And there are now active populations of this throughout the UK, but it's still not very common. Biodiversity is really key to this. And this is from the Natural History Museum's website, but it's biodiversity is all life on Earth. It's in all its varied forms. I think I read the other day that back in 2011, we believed that there were approximately 8.5 million species on Earth. That's all animals and plants. Last year, scientists looking at microbes realized that because of microbes are tiny, as I said, micro species that we can't see with the naked eye. There's such variety there that there must be now, they reckon there's over 1 trillion different species if you include microbes, which is mind-boggling, really. And if you imagine the example that I gave you of the blue butterfly, those sort of relationships are duplicated millions upon millions of times throughout across the planet in all sorts of different ways. And when you get into places like rainforests, they become incredibly complex with all sorts of different species relying on them. I find this sort of thing fascinating. And as I said, that's where, as I said, each time I run a course, I realize something new and how little we've scratched the surface of our understanding of these sort of things. I've put throughout this presentation just lots of lovely pictures because I enjoy taking pictures. So these are all ones that I've taken, just showing some of the beautiful form that nature takes. So we've got foxgloves here. The top photograph is actually a type of berry, but I forget the name of it. And then we've got Chinese lanterns, which are a lovely fruit related to tomatoes. As I said, they're just, some of them are just in there for interest. I'm just trying to work out how to admit person that's coming. It won't let me use my cursor for the moment.
I've done that.
Oh, thank you. Appreciated. Is my sound coming through clear enough, Sam?
Yes, perfect.
Great, lovely. Okay, so I will move on. Now, there we go. Oh. There we go. So, what's permaculture? Now, this is something that is nothing new. It basically, it is a term that was coined back in the 60s by a chap called Bill Mollison. I'll give you a few examples of what people have described it as, but I've got a very simple definition of it, which we'll come to. So it's a philosophy of working with rather than against nature, protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless labor, looking at plants and animals in all their functions rather than treating any single area as a single product system. It's often viewed as a set of gardening techniques, but actually it's, and this is where I think it's key. It can be used in so many applications. There are people that that really design their businesses around the principles of permaculture. There are people whose family life. There's all sorts of ways that you can use it within different systems. A practical method of developing ecologically harmonious, efficient, and productive systems that can be used by anyone, anywhere. That's quite a good one. Now, the first picture here is the Dame Hannah Rogers Trust at Seal Hayne. Now, we use the principles of permaculture to design this garden. And we're coming to those principles in a minute, but what you're looking at here is a bed of all sorts of different flowers. Now, there are a whole number of systems within this. So things, for example, this was specifically designed to attract pollinators. On the left of the picture, you can see fruit bushes. It was also a windbreak and also the deep, dense covering shaded out. There was no bare soil really, which under natural circumstances you would then get lots of weeds coming up. So it's a very self-regulating bed. I can talk a lot more about these sort of things in more detail if anyone is interested in how you go about planting these sort of things in the discussion later. In a much smaller way, the picture down at the bottom on the right, that's in my garden, and it just shows, for example, using vertical spaces. So I grow berries. For example, this is a thornless blackberry, and I've got about 5 different species. In fact, well, there's about now 16 species in that one bed of different types of berries, but I use the vertical space as well. So it's making sure that we're using the entire area rather than just having ground growing or everything at the same level. Now, this is where my definition comes in much, what I believe: care of the earth, care of people, and setting limits to consumption. These 3 things are absolutely integral to anything. If I'm thinking, does it adhere to the principles of permaculture? Simply put, is earth care, people care, and fair share. Now, those principles are, they're not difficult, but I think the best way for me to demonstrate it, rather than giving lots of examples, very specific examples, I'm going to give you one specific example. Sorry, there's some more pictures here, which I'll explain in a minute. I'm going to give you one specific example of a project that I was a manager of for a while. Just the interlude here, you've got a fractal broccoli, which I think is fascinating, and a couple of more pictures of what we call companion planting, which is another concept that I'm going to come to in a little bit. I'm going to come back to this slide in a second, but the Grow Cycle Urban Mushroom Farm, when I did my permaculture certificate must be about 7 or 8 years ago now, my teacher, Caroline Aiken, is a wonderful teacher and very well-known permaculture teacher, didn't realize that I had been the manager of this farm, and in the first session used it, and in her words saying it was the perfect example of a permaculture project, which I sat there glowing and then said, oh, you know, that this was the case, that I'd been, you know, I'd set this farm up, which yeah, was very interesting. But I'm going to talk you through the farm and show you how this sort of system will work. So the basic basis of this farm is that we take used coffee grounds from that are generated in city centres. So on any day within any city or town in the UK, there are tons and tons and tons of waste coffee grounds. Waste coffee grounds produced from the coffee machines that are in cafes. Most of the time that goes directly into landfill. Most often those cafes have to pay to have it taken away. It's not a very sustainable thing. That coffee can be used for so many different things. In Australia, they make roads out of it. You can use it for biodiesel or creating biodiesel. We decided to try mushrooms. Now, it actually is a perfect substrate for growing mushrooms on. So the start was teaming up with a local charity who wanted to work with people who are out of work, to give them job opportunities and training for people who've been in long-term unemployment. So in that aspect, you have the people care side of things. The earth care, we were basically collecting and taking out of creating a cyclical system, I suppose, and that's where this is key. It's a system with very, very, very little waste. The coffee grounds are collected in the city centre. If you know Exeter, I'm just going to show you this photo here. John Lewis, right there. That's the farm was in an unused office building directly opposite John Lewis. So it was literally in the heart of the city. I would cycle round the city every day with a bike and a little trailer on the back of it, collecting all of this coffee, take it back to the farm and bag it up with oyster mushroom, mix it up, put it in bags with oyster mushroom mycelium, and then put it in a dark room for 2 weeks. And the process, as that process is happening, it produces lots of heat. So we actually then used the heat from the process in the dark room and channeled it, and I'll show you how we did that in a minute, through to another room that needed to be heated. So literally that process of the mushrooms growing heated a whole room for us to continue growing. Once those mushrooms were then grown, we sold them back to the cafes often that we would collect the coffee from. So it's this perfect cycle, really. This is just a few pictures. This is before we set the farm up. At the top there, that's us created. This is the room that we channeled. Well, you can see in the bottom photo the tube from one room to the other, channeling the heat produced from one process into the room where it was needed. And then this is my big compost turner that I would put all the coffee grounds in and mix it with a mushroom mycelium. That's them all bagged up in the first dark room, and then into the second room with a mask, because you have to be very careful. The reason I no longer do this job, unfortunately, is because I became allergic to the spores of the oyster mushrooms after a year of exposure, which even wearing a mask, unfortunately, was a real shame. But and then this is our final product. So these mushrooms are they're delicious, absolutely delicious, and quite high value. We used to produce about 50 kilos a week. And That business is still going in a different form over in Dartington with the guys who set up the project originally. As I said, I'm unfortunately not involved with that anymore, but it's to me it's a perfect system as well, because as I said, it's got very, very little waste. I'm just going to go back to a different slide, which is here. We have the 3 key principles of permaculture, and then these 12 extended principles, which are things like producing no waste, using small and slow solutions. So not rushing into something, taking our time, observing, interacting with the natural system, mimicking natural systems. And these sort of things, the catch and store energy is a really useful one. As I said, we were using waste heat from one room to heat that was produced by one system to heat another room. So all of these things are really integral to what we did with that project. And as I said, I just wanted to use that as an example. Now, permaculture is not inherently a Christian thing, but all of the values really, to me, tie in so well with what I believe is our duty as Christians. I'll add a caveat to this. I think majority of people on this Zoom probably are of the Christian faith, but I think it was advertised out to a bit wider circle. So if there is anyone that isn't this, of anyone with any faith or none, I think these principles are all, as humans as well, they're really integral to us living on this planet in a way that is sustainable and looks after what we have. From a biblical point of view, I love this psalm, really. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place. What is man that you are mindful of him? The son of man that you care for him? You made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. You made him ruler over the works of your hands. You put everything under his feet, all flocks and herds and the beasts of the field, the birds of the air and the fish in the sea, all that swim in the paths of the seas. I just think it's really beautiful poetry, but it really sort of puts it in perspective, really. That Genesis chapter 2 talks of work and taking care of, but it also speaks of dominion. And I think that the word really can be translated so much better into serve, preserve, and in my view, stewardship. But I don't think it's possible to steward something if you don't really understand it. And that's where I think these concepts like understanding ecology and things like permaculture, not just permaculture, but our place within God's creation and how those things work can give us such an important. It's very, very important within that stewardship. This was a present when we moved into our house. Unfortunately, it got cracked, but just a flagstone that goes on the kiss of the sun for pardon, song of the bird for mirth. One is nearer to God in a garden than anywhere else on earth. I love that. That's and then just one more. I've been reading a book called The Artisan Soul, and this sentence just really captured my imagination. And it said, God begins by creating light out of darkness and finishes by breathing life into man. Everything in between is nothing less than extraordinary. Within each movement, there is a single intention, whether it is the creation of the solar system or the unique design of this planet's ecosystems. Every stroke within this creative act carries with it the intention of creating life. I just think that's absolutely beautiful. And the more I see and try to understand things like ecology, the more I see God's hand in this and the beauty and complexity of this. It's extraordinary. The relationships, the symbiotic relationships across the planet, and how intricate and complex this is. I find it extraordinarily beautiful, really. Very passionate about that. Now the next slide, I wanted to put in this. If you are shocked by, you might be shocked. This is an image from the St. Mag's garden. I'm about to, if you might want to look away if you don't want to see lots of drug paraphernalia, but I'm going to show it because I think it's important to show the reality. One of the reasons, again, that I think we have a duty within this, with the creation of this garden that we are at St Mags, this is a very real problem. This is one Monday morning. I found 15 needles. I'm going to move on. It's not a very pleasant image, but one of the things that became very apparent. Well, one of the things that is very apparent. This isn't a problem of the church. This is a societal problem, and there are so many people out there that are, well, in real desperate need. And I think that St Mags does such a wonderful job of bringing so many of those people in and really creating those relationships. What I don't want anyone to think about this garden is that it's something that's to try and make it somewhere where people, certainly we don't particularly want drug use happening, and I hope that reduces, but it's not to stop people coming in. I think it's the perfect place for people to actually form these relationships, whether it's through people working and volunteering in the garden, whether it's people just taking time to be in that garden, and the relationships that form by meeting people there. In the few months that I've worked there, I've had some incredible conversations with people about faith, about their stories, about the addictions that they are having. And I think I'm not going to talk too much about this, but for me, heroin is one of the most wasteful substances on this planet. Not just from the paraphernalia that you see there, that all of this different stuff that is truly awful in its material kind of waste, but also the waste of people's lives and potential. And this is where I think, as Christians, we have another real duty here, that there are these people that are on our doorstep, and we have an opportunity to meet with them, and we have an opportunity to draw them into something else. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm really passionate about trying to create this garden and to create spaces for people to be able to come together. So I'm just going to come back out of the share screen just for a minute, if I can. Just because I'd like to see your faces just for a second before I carry on. I mean, like talking through the screen of my presentation for a little while. Now that I've kind of gone through that's really the sort of some of the basic principles that I've used in creating the garden. Really, this sort of sustainability, trying to create a place that is really beautiful, not just for people, but a home for wildlife as well, because our city centres are often devoid of nature. But there is so much nature that will come in if it's given the space and it's given the opportunity to do so. So what I want to now sort of move forward to, having taken now I've given you those sort of some of the understanding of those concepts, is how that's then in the garden, how I'm trying to create this. So has anybody got any burning questions that they want to ask at this point before I move forward? I'd be happy to answer anything, or we can come back to it afterwards. Yeah, cool, that's fine. I will carry on.
Lyndon, you've got a couple of questions in the chat, just to say.
Thank you. I'll come back out of it. Perfect. So, those questions there are answered very quickly. Do I use lunar planting? I don't. That's biodynamic principle, I believe, which is quite interesting. Biodynamics is something that I've experienced. I've been on farms that use it, but I've never actually used it myself. It's very interesting. I can talk a little bit about that later on. that mushroom farm, I believe, was on TV after I left there, and the coffee filters. Yes, we could use the filters as well as the little pucks of coffee that would sort of come into the out of the machines, but also the filters. It all went in together, and tea bags as well. It was mainly coffee, but tea bags, all of those sort of things provide a perfect substrate for growing them. What does permaculture mean? I've got one more question. Hopefully I've managed to answer a few of those, but if anyone still does want to ask more questions about that, I'll come back to that afterwards. I'm going to pop back into the, where am I? Share screen bit. Okay. Right, so as I said, what I wanted to try now to do is to try and give you a little idea of why I've designed it as I did, and some of the different habitats that I'm trying to create. So the main sort of areas within the garden are going to be wildflower meadows, hedges and wildlife corridors, the pollinator garden, fruit tree guilds, which is something I will explain the concept of in a bit, the woodland, log piles, compost bins, and then slightly more formal lawns. This is a bit of a plan. It's two. That's the bottom of it, and this is the top. But just really sort of showing the church building. I was hoping my cursor would work so I could move it around and show you, but it doesn't. But basically, this is. I didn't want this to be a really complicated garden. It's not really about making it complicated. In fact, it wanted to be nice and easy maintenance in many senses. But what the main thing about this is connecting up the spaces. So where we have things like hedges moving into wildflower areas, moving into woodland, these are creating corridors for wildlife to be able to move around the space. If you, for example, you're a small mammal, a hedgehog, you don't want to be walking over large areas of open ground or short grass everywhere, where otherwise you're seen by predators. You know, there's so many different species in that sense, whether it's insects or mammals, rely on these wildlife corridors. So I've tried to link up all the different habitats within it, whilst also creating habitat, and also creating things like food and shelter spaces. So there's lots of bird boxes, bat boxes. They're not in yet, but they will be. Lots and lots of plants that are really nutrient rich particularly for insects, which then in turn attracts in wildlife, birds and other insects as well. I'm going to start by talking about wildflower meadows, and here's a couple of pictures here. These are not the church. That's hopefully what things will look like. I started the process of creating the wildflower meadows about a month and a half ago. In fact, I'll show you the seed. Yeah, so currently this is what it looks like. It has to look a bit rubbish to begin with, because you have to scarify, which means you go in and you basically open up patches within the grass, because really wildflowers don't like competition with grass. Grass is a very dominant species, and its roots will tend to strangle out lots of other more delicate flowers and wildflowers. So you really open up all these spaces. And then I have planted a particular species called yellow rattle. Now, yellow rattle is a really unusual plant in that it's a plant parasite. It specifically parasitizes grass. So the roots of the grass, the yellow rattle goes in and actually reduces the amount of grass in that area, allowing the wildflowers to develop. So if you went down to the church at the moment, you'd see some areas that look a bit rough. That's where I've been raking and sowing wildflower seeds. Unfortunately, it's been very, very dry for the last couple of months. And although we're beginning to get a little bit of those coming up, I would have expected a lot more germination by now if it were wetter and the conditions were right. But that's nature, and there's not much we can do about that. One of the other slight problems encountering a wildflower meadow. Wildflowers don't really like very nutritious soil, and unfortunately, being built on top of a graveyard, this is very nutritious soil. There are different ways you can reduce the fertility, but one of the things I'm experimenting with, I'm going to try and plant an area of oilseed rape, which will take an enormous amount of the because it's a very hungry plant, will take a lot of the nutrients out of the soil, allowing the wildflowers to develop better. That's something I read about. I've not done that before, but I'm going to experiment a little bit with that, I think. Now, literally on Friday, in fact, sorry, we received 200 native hedging plants from the Woodland Trust, which was a really lovely grant. That's going to get planted all along the northeast side of the church, all the way along the barrier, the edge where it drops down into the lower woodland area. Now, that will form, it is useful for a number of things. It's going to form really, really good corridor, but there will be lots of things like berries. So there are all sorts of species in there, various berries and flowers that will be really, really rich food source for different insects and birds. Really, really useful habitat for things like moths. I'm quite used to, as an ecologist, starting conversations about moths and people's eyes glazing over. But I have to assure you, moths are incredibly, incredibly useful. There are so many species in this country, but they're such an important indicator species. And that means that if you have moths, you generally have much less pollution, and also they're very specific to types of plants. So you kind of know what you've got growing if you've got specific types of moths there. When I was a ranger, we used to set what's called a light trap each night, and in the grounds of the nature reserve, and we'd get, it doesn't harm the moths, and you release them in the morning, but we'd get upwards of 80 species per night in the summer, some of them the size of your hand, and all sorts of beautiful colors, all the way down to tiny little micro moths that are, a couple of millimeters long and brown and don't look very impressive. But there's such a variety of those species, and it's just because we don't see them doesn't mean they're not important. And I'm hoping to really, really increase moth populations, butterfly populations. In turn, that will increase things like bats, because they're food sources for bats, various types of birds as well. So all of these things have knock-on effects. As I said, as you start to create the habitat, you bring some wildlife in. More wildlife, it's exponential, really. This is just, again, isn't the church, but it just shows the top one is a hedge that's been laid, which is actually really beautiful. And there's so many different traditional ways of doing this. And when it comes to it, it takes a few years before you lay a hedge. When it comes to it, I'd like us to do it the traditional Devon way, which is one of those things I'll need to actually go away and read up about, because I don't know how to do that yet. I know the Dorset way, but I think I'd probably get in trouble if I did that down here. So we'll see. Now, on the area that I think I've spent probably the most time at the moment is the pollinator garden, and that surrounds the apse of the church. There's all sorts of interesting plants in there, and anyone who knows me probably knows the fact that I'm not really into your run-of-the-mill plants. I tend to like unusual things. I like walking into a garden and going, ooh, I wonder what that is, rather than necessarily recognizing everything. But I have put some interesting plants there. I've had some really lovely donations of all sorts of things from different people as well. Some people on this call as well. So thank you, guys. This area is going to be a bit of a riot of color, of different smells, and very, very sensory. Now, what that will do is to bring in all sorts of different species that are pollinators. And we often get, well, rightly so, caught up with honeybees and, the plight of honeybees. there are over 1,500 species of pollinators in the UK, and that's ranges from the honeybee to things like, dozens of species of bumblebee and wasps. And again, people think of the big yellow and black wasps, but there are so many really, really important species of wasps. It won't come anywhere near you and buzz around and sting you, but are vital parts of our ecosystem. Things like ants, moths, and so many other species that will be attracted to the garden because of this area. I'm planting lots of very nectar and pollen-rich plants. And I'd be really happy once we open the garden to walk people around and point out specific plants and talk about those particular plants, as understanding a bit more about each of those. Just wanted to add in as well that in tropical countries, our pollinators over here, all of our pollinators are insects. But I grew up in Africa, and we have a lot of bats and birds, so things like hummingbirds. But yeah, fruit bats are incredibly important pollinators as well. So obviously not in this country. I also want this to really look beautiful from the roadside. I want it to be something that people look over at St. Mags as they're driving past and go, oh, wow, I want to come and have a look at that, and bring them into the church. I include the garden as part of the church because it is. I want to bring people to this place and for them to walk around in awe at it, and then walk into that beautiful church and just feel the presence of God there. These are a couple of pictures. This tall yellow plant here is a bottle brush. It's from Australia, just in one of the gardens that I do. But it's so beautiful. I managed to catch one bee on it, but at one point there was just dozens of bees flying around this. The bottom is Valerian, which is a very useful medicinal plant. Also really good for attracting things like hummingbird hawk moths, which is a day-flying moth. Looks like a hummingbird. And then the top picture is in my garden. This is what's called a rose chafer, a really stunning insect that you find quite commonly in this country, but they tend not to like pollution. So you don't often find them within cities or towns. So you find them a lot in the countryside. And then a few of the moths I was talking about. So my little daughter Seren, at the age of 2, spotted the giant moth on the left-hand side here, underneath a chair in our garden. And this is a Privet hawk moth, and it's almost as big as my hand, actually. Beautiful thing. The top one is a cinnabar moth, which is a day-flying moth. And again, the colors on it are incredible. Its food plant is a plant called Ragwort, which is not very popular with a lot of people, but I have to be honest, I like it. It can be very dangerous to horses, and cattle. But from my experience in running cattle, there are ways around that, which again I'm happy to discuss if anyone wants to chat. And the bottom I found in my garden is a very rare, what's called a sawfly. I thought it was a wasp to begin with, but I looked it up. It's a very rare sawfly. And that's normally the point where people's eyes glaze over. So we'll move on. Right. I didn't intend the bed at the front here to look like a grave, but it did. So much so that the drama group wanted to use it as a grave for filming. But that was the beginnings of what's called a tree guild, and we'll go into that in just a second. The other picture is the first plant to go into the pollinator bed, which is what is that? That's an echium, but it's a miniature echium. Really beautiful, stunning plant that will hopefully attract lots and lots of bees. So the concept of a fruit tree guild, some people may have heard of companion planting. Companion planting is really where you plant particular plants together that benefit each other. And there are so many different examples. At a garden level, in horticulture, for example, if you plant if you planted a row of carrots, it would always be a useful thing to plant a row of either onions or leeks or garlic either side of it, because the smell of garlic deters carrot root fly. So they tend to fly over the carrots and not affect them. So now that's a simple example of a single companion planting. A tree guild is where you have a central tree. So in the St. Mag's garden, I've planted 2 fruit trees. One is a Victoria plum, and the other is a green gage, both dwarf varieties. So they're the central tree. And then around that tree, you plant a whole range of other plants that do specific jobs. So I think I've got pictures. Yeah, the large picture is of a plant called Comfrey, which is one of my favorite garden plants. It is a great pollinator, great for pollinators, but it has a very, very deep taproot. And what that does is it brings up nutrients, specifically minerals that generally the roots of the fruit tree won't be able to access. And as it brings them up to the top, you then chop the comfrey down, and the leaves then release those nutrients into the soil. So it's very useful for that. You plant lots of things like herbs, which will often have a beneficial effect in bringing in pollinator insects, but deterring other things like aphids. And the way I've described it to certain people, if you're an aphid or other insect pest species, most of the time they navigate using a sense of smell. So instead of and they're also generally quite specific to their host plant. So say you're an aphid that feeds on a plum tree. As you're flying along, you're trying to find the scent of the plum tree. If, as you fly past, you just get lots and lots of things like thyme, oregano, rosemary, and all these other very, very pungent smells, mint, it has a way of deterring those pest species from actually landing on the host species. So it protects to some degree your fruit tree from pests. And you can make this very, very complicated, or you can just plant a few different things around to aid it. I'm going more towards the complicated side of things, I have to be honest, with one of them with the Victoria plum and with lots and lots of different things, and then the other one a little less so. I won't spend any time on that one actually. This bed here is where I've planted one of them. This is obviously before I did anything there. This all looks very different now. I'm afraid when I wrote this presentation, I'd not taken I haven't added in too many pictures of what the garden looks like now, but I would really encourage you to come down and have a look and see how it's changing. It really is starting to take form as it looks like a garden now. It doesn't, if that makes sense. It looks like it's something's being created. I just want to very, very briefly touch on this, which I'd be happy to go into later if anyone is interested, but the concept of a fruit tree guild, you can expand even further. And this is where permaculture comes in to play, that you are mimicking natural systems. Those plants being planted together aren't a mistake. That's something that regularly happens within natural systems. The healthiest fruit tree happens to have germinated around all these other plants that will be there, supporting it. Now, a forest garden follows that principle by the fact that you mimic the different layers of a forest. My garden here is very small, but it is a forest garden. It has all of the different layers of it. So you have an underground root layer. So I grow things like ochre, which is a type of, or oxalis, which is a type of little tuber, and various other tubers underground. Then I tend to ground cover with things like wild strawberry. The problem, if you leave big areas of open ground, nature will fill it with weeds or things that you don't particularly want to be there. So always fill it with something that's useful. So I've got Korean raspberry and which is a ground cover raspberry, and then these little strawberries that cover the ground. They also help to retain moisture, which is good. So it's not just stopping weeds, but the leaves have this effect of cooling the soil and helping to retain moisture. And then various levels of shrubs, small trees, much taller trees. The tallest tree in my garden's probably the largest Torbay palm that I've ever seen. It's over 30 foot tall, an enormous thing. But also got an apple tree, a yew tree, and various others. It's only a small urban garden, but I've been growing it towards this idea of a forest garden for a long time. And then you've got the vertical layer of vine. So what I explained earlier about growing all of the fruit up my fence, I also grow things up trees because it creates a whole different layer of the garden. The red berry here, which you might have seen on the picture, the poster for this talk, is my favorite fruit, and it's called a Chilean Guava. It was also Queen Victoria's favorite fruit. It's absolutely delicious. It looks like a blueberry, but it has I don't know if anyone knows what a guava tastes like. It has the flesh of it tastes like a guava, and then the skin tastes like a guava, and the inside tastes like an alpine strawberry. It's absolutely delicious. But I'm going to be planting some of those in the church garden. And then the other pictures are just again of my garden, showing this sort of, well, the bottom picture it's just a sea of green, but there are, I think, the last count was 16 types of fruit within that one bed, all growing at different heights and different levels, all helping each other in various ways, some acting as support, others acting as shade for those plants that don't like to grow in direct sunlight. So they all have their different functions. To some people, that's a real mess, and I understand that, but to me, I see beauty in it. The woodland area at St Mags, we've got lots of habitat there for birds. There's a lot of really mature trees, the yew, holly, and holm oak being the main ones. The holm oak itself is a plant that's a Mediterranean oak tree. Doesn't really support very much life, interestingly. So there's only one species in the UK that actually lives on it, or survives on it. It's a type of butterfly. Whereas the English oak has over 480 types of insect, fungi, and other plants that specifically live on the English oak. So just because it's a tree doesn't always necessarily mean it's I'm not going to say it's not a good thing. It is having the effect of bringing of capturing carbon, but it is not particularly a biodiverse tree. Whereas both yew and holly are very much so. I'm going to be planting lots of shade-loving plants and things that you would often find within woodlands, like woodland bulb plants underneath that. Now is not necessarily the right time to be doing that, so that will be a project for later on in the year. And this was just a picture of that sort of area when before I started doing any work. I've not got a lot left, so of these left, but I'll just go through the last few. Going again, attracting wildlife in. We're going to be creating lots of habitat for them. So things like log piles are really useful spaces for all sorts of things: spiders, insects, invertebrates, hedgehogs, and then we're putting bird and bat boxes throughout all of the trees as well. That was one of my log piles to begin with, but unfortunately someone took it away for firewood, so it is no more. We'll build another one. This is in my garden, and again, this is underneath the giant palm tree that I was mentioning a minute ago. It's just a space where I've had hedgehogs in there. I've had good space for slow worms and various other things. The brick with a hole and the bits of wood with holes in it are just really good spaces for things like solitary bees, which are again very overlooked pollinator that we don't really think about, but they're important. And something I'm very fond of, compost. So to me, it's one of the most important places in the garden because it allows us to recycle so much green waste. which otherwise you would have to pay to get taken away, or just it becomes a nuisance really to have to get rid of lots of green waste. This way we can actually create our own compost to use on the site by actually using what we've got there. It's a really good sustainable system. It's also wonderful for wildlife. If you some of you might not enjoy this, but rooting around a compost heap, you will find all sorts of different worms and invertebrates and things that are all absolutely vital to the health of the soil. And I think that's something I haven't really talked very much about in this, but soil health is so important. We kind of take it for granted. We equate soil and dirt, but actually soil is such a rich living thing. It's so full of life that you can't see it, but there are billions upon billions of organisms within every teaspoon of soil. And compost and soil are quite different things. Compost is a much more organic. It contributes to the organic side of soil, but to create even just a few centimeters of soil takes years and years and years. So it's something that we do have to be. It's something we have to be careful with. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of modern farming practices don't look after soil as we should. So it's something quite passionate about. One of our other sustainable things here, we're going to be putting in water butts around the church, which will also help us to collect water and to use within the garden. So that's, creating our own irrigation there. Some pictures of compost. And then, as I've talked about before, this garden is not just for wildlife. It's a really important place that's at the heart of the community, really. I want it to be beautiful. I want it to be a place where anyone feels welcome, where anyone can come in and just spend time praying, contemplating, or just enjoying the space for being beautiful. And that's so important. I think that it's not just a wildlife garden. It's such an important place for people as well. This was last Tuesday. In fact, Steph and Ali, I know you're here today. We were out every Tuesday now. Sorry, a little bit of shameless promotion here, but every Tuesday, 1 till 3, we're going to be doing a volunteer group. And there's so many different things to do in the garden. I really want to cultivate some real love and some real care, people to take some, I suppose, ownership for various parts of it, but really just to get involved and just to, it was such a lovely social activity that we did. Just the 4 of us the other day. Got that again tomorrow, and anyone is welcome. Just we meet in the car park at 1 o'clock at St Mag's, and there are a range of different things, ranging from quite gentle weeding up to making paths. We got all of our hedge plants the other day, so there's going to be a lot of planting of hedges and that various things like that. And I'm going to finish just with this picture. That's my little girl. And that picture for me just encapsulates what it is to be in a beautiful garden. That was my little daughter, Seren, when she was 2, I think, singing underneath the apple tree to herself. She didn't know I took the photo at the time, but she was just in this beautiful, innocent place of just appreciating the beauty around her in the garden. And I thought that was rather lovely. So that's me done. For now, let me just put this. Well, it looks like we've got all right. Load of questions and things. I'll go through that in a minute. I hope that was interesting and that people learned a few things. Would everyone like to just take a few minutes, go grab a drink, or have a few minutes just to perhaps even have a little think about that? If, as I said, I'd love to chat to you all, but there's no obligation to stay on. That was the presentation side of it. But if you're interested to ask any questions or chat about it, I would really, really love to. I'm going to be here for another hour or so. So I wanted to, as I said, just leave that space open for a bit more of an open chat about different things, whether it's some of the projects that I've done or this particular project or particular concepts or anything like that. So please, as I said, let's perhaps should we just take 5 minutes, come back at 1:45? Yeah, it's about 7 minutes, about 1:45. I'll have a little look through some of the questions, and then, yeah, we can have a bit of a chat then. That's okay. Great.
Thanks, Lyndon. See you soon.
No problem.
Yeah, they've turned it into more of an entrepreneurial business kind of model, haven't they?
So it's a great concept anyway.
It is.
I just, Kath, thank you so much for the box of plants that you dropped over. That's wonderful. They're all in. There's some really lovely ones there. Much appreciated. You're muted at the moment. I can't hear you, but it's.
I'm glad you've got them all. That's fine. Glad. I missed you the day I brought them down.
I think it was you brought them on the Monday, and I've moved the day to Tuesday now for this. Yeah, I think more people could make the Tuesdays.
I will try and join you on a Tuesday, but at the moment my Tuesdays are full, so I'll have to juggle things a bit.
Well, you're welcome anytime, as is anybody. Lovely. Margaret, thank you for your message there as well. I've just responded, but yeah, it'd be lovely to meet you. Really, yeah, that'd be really nice.
Yeah, as Catherine knows, I've got a lot of fingers and a lot of pies.
I know that one. I've all sorts of
a lot of them are green pies. I'm watching my tayberries just about burst into flower at the moment, so I'm just they're wonderful.
We've had such a dry few weeks, but because it's been so sunny. Everything. My garden is it's looking quite amazing actually at the moment. I have had watering though.
My primroses are wilting.
Yeah, likewise. I'll just wait a couple of minutes until a few people come back. So, Margaret, you said you've got Ragwort. In which churchyard is that?
Right, it's the original parish church. So it's the very old church with the little white crosses on the corner of Lucia Street, just down from Central Church.
I know where that is. Yeah.
And one section, it was the latest section that was added as burial ground. That we have set up as a meadow. We tried all sorts of plug plants and seeds and everything, but it is such rich soil that the grasses grow, but the grasses attract the insects feed the bats and the birds. Yep. We've got the thing that thrives is the true geranium.
Lovely.
And they are just magical, but we get all sorts of different things depending on conditions at the time of year. But ragwort comes up, and because we've got no cattle round our area, we leave it there, for the insects.
So it's ragwort. I think people expect me to be very anti it because I've kept horses and cattle, but it is such an important wildlife plant. I did a lot of experimenting when I was a ranger with ragwort. I counted in a season over 52. I think it was 52 types of invertebrate on there. But there are 14 types of fungus that only grow on ragwort, and 27 species of insect that are in. We all think of cinnabar moth, but I think it's 27 species that rely solely on ragwort. And if you get rid of it, I understand the reasons for it. If you are grazing horses, it's and you're cutting for hay, there is a reason why to do that. But the other interesting thing about ragwort, it's what's called a successional plant. So if you just leave what happens is it's a pioneer plant. It starts off on it loves ground that's been disturbed. So you will often find it as one of the first plants that arises in a place that's been dug up or open ground is there. So that and thistle are two. There's another one. over a course of years, as other things start to develop there, they outcompete it and it disappears. So I had about 6 growing at the end of my garden for 2 years, and they just disappeared after a couple of years, and they've not come back. And I did experiments with a field where we divided it into 4, and interestingly, so one of them we used a spray to spray it. One of them we chopped the ragwort down. One of the quarters we left, and the other we pulled the ragwort, which is the traditional way to pull it, to get rid of it. And every time you pull a ragwort out, you create the exact conditions necessary for ragwort seed to germinate.
Right.
So
Yeah.
2 years, it had reduced in all of the areas, particularly the one where we sprayed it. Unfortunately, that's the most effective. But the area where we pulled the ragwort, which is what everyone does normally, was like a sea of yellow because it just creates the perfect conditions for ragwort to grow. So actually, as I said, it was a learning experience for us to know that if you actually can persevere, you can cut it down before it goes to seed. It will eventually just outcompete itself and die off. So
Yeah, no, we're more than happy with it. Our biggest problem is Alexander's at the moment.
I didn't hear that. Sorry, you crackled a little bit.
The biggest problem at the moment is Alexander's.
You can eat that though.
Not the amount that the way that it spreads. You've never managed to eat it all. I blame the Romans.
Yeah. Oh, right. Let's have a little look. I think everyone's pretty much come back. I just had a little look down through the questions. So yeah, some really interesting questions. Thank you all for your lovely comments as well. That was really nice. I think a couple of people have had to leave. Oh, there's a few more questions coming as well. Sam, you mentioned that Joe spotted a violet oil beetle. Was that at the church?
No, that was at Sheldon Retreat Centre.
Right. Okay. So that would have been very excited about that. But yeah, wonderful. Good one. Sorry, I'm just having a little read back down through here. Alison's asked about the plant order that we did last year, where there were 95 species. How we would do this for fauna as well. Well, I think that's the sort of thing that I would probably, there are different methods that you could do. So I think we talked, Alison, about butterflies, for example. And interestingly, last week, as we were gardening, we saw 3 different species. We saw holly blue, an orange tip, and speckled wood, which is a woodland butterfly. Now, there are different survey methods that you can use for different species. So I would set up, for example, a butterfly transect. And what you do is in fact, I'm going to do it. We'll start it from tomorrow. We set up a route that covers the whole area, and it's a specific route. You walk it at the same time. Well, it doesn't have to be the same time each week, but it's roughly the same sort of conditions each week, and you walk around the site following the same route, and then you note any butterflies, and over the whole season you begin to kind of collate a bit of a picture of what's there really, and also it shows you you'll obviously get seasonal change with the numbers that you get, but it also shows you if something, for example, has been really common and then suddenly drops off, you'll start to notice that, or if something suddenly has a population explosion. There's different things that you can draw out of the data that you'd get from that sort of thing. Part of it is really just observing as well, just as we're out in the garden, making notes of any species that we notice. It's not like plants where you might throw a quadrant out and then count what's in there. In that most animals are able to move, so throw a quadrant at them and they'll run away. But there are different methods. But yeah, we could certainly set up a few different things to start monitoring the fauna in the garden. I'd be quite interested to do that. Yeah,
that would be really interesting. Yeah, thank you for that.
I'll work out a butterfly transact tomorrow, and I'd love to do moth trapping at some point. It's probably not the sort of thing that we can do every night, but because you kind of have to be there to then release them. But you can do, yeah. I could do a moth evening if anyone was interested. As I said, I'm very used to talking about this, and it's so funny. You just see people's eyes like kind of just glaze over because they sort of think people think moths are, you know, very boring little the things you find in your cupboard, but there are some truly spectacular ones, even in this country. And you know, we don't really think of beautiful butterflies and moths as tropical things, but they're emperor moth, for example, is just the most extraordinary beautiful thing. And some of the hawk moths that we get here, all sorts of colors and sizes, and yeah, it's stunning, really, really beautiful.
I have a couple of people with you when you're doing the moth trap, because it's quite a useful source of light for people around the back there.
Yes. Which there was another question here from Nick about something to do that. Let me just have a look. I can't find it, Nick. Do you want to ask again? I think it was something to do with vandalism, or I've lost the question.
Yeah, it was just as the garden. I mean, fabulous ideas, and absolutely love it all. But as it's in the middle of a town centre and where we are, what experience is there of preventing things like vandalism and theft? And you know, just an open question, really.
Yeah. From my perspective, something that I was very much aware that would be a problem, and I think realistically will always be a problem because of the area where it is. My hope is that as the garden develops and you start to get more people there, and it starts to take a look of something that's more loved, and actually, I know that can have the opposite effect. It can make sometimes create more vandalism that people, you know, but it really is my hope that will change some perceptions, particularly also things surrounding litter, that people might be less likely to leave litter if they notice that it's being regularly picked and it looks tidier. I don't know. I will be 100% honest with you. This is the first. I've done quite a few designs for different gardens before, but this is the very first time I've done anything in such an urban setting. And I've spoken to a couple of other churches. There's one in Plymouth. Is it St Matthias in Plymouth, I believe, who have done a similar sort of thing. And the lady Helen that I chatted to, her experience had been that as the area had improved, that they'd seen a significantly reduced amount of littering and the sort of vandalism that she'd had been experienced before. But as I said, my personal experience is I don't have a lot. Does anybody else here have, Margaret, for example? What would you? Yeah.
Yeah. When we started working on the churchyard, which was 2006, I mean, it was a total no-go area. The only people in it were alcoholics and drug users. And the whole idea of working on it was to design out antisocial behavior, which to a vast extent we have. I mean, we haven't got rid of everything, but I would say that as far as plants being stolen, that is the people who fancy that plant for their garden. It's not vandalism. It's down to people who don't want to pay for them. We did a little pollinator garden in the corner of the coach station car park as a community project. And the only plants that got stolen from there were two very nice matching shrubs. And they got stolen. So what we put in there now is things that people wouldn't buy, that are very common, but absolutely loved by the insects. And they self-seed and people don't steal them. So if you put in things that haven't got a vast horticultural or monetary value, they're far more likely to stay in your garden, and the insects don't care how much they've cost.
Yeah. So far, I've not spent a penny on plants. I've had some very generous donations from various people, and well, my wife will tell you I'm terrible. I go around lots of places with a little set with secateurs and various equipment and take cuttings from things. I never damage plants, but I'm an avid cutting taker, and I've got all sorts of things growing in the garden. So been putting all sorts of different things in, but it hasn't monetarily, it hasn't cost anything yet from from the plants. However, I think there is some budget for a few things that we will need to fill in some spaces with, I think. But I will take that into account, actually, Margaret, that as you said, sometimes certain things that people might want to put into their own garden might be more more likely to get taken. So
yeah, thanks, that's a very encouraging answer. Thank you. Thanks, Margaret, too.
Does anyone have any? I said I'm looking down through the questions here. There's lots of really nice comments. Anyone, any specific questions about anything that I talked about, or comments or anything that anyone would like to make? It's really sort of an open floor at the moment, I suppose.
I think we were really lucky to have the wood chips from the local authority. What's your plan? What's your plan for that, Lyndon?
Yeah, that was
useful.
Funny enough, so both Sam and myself had the thought on the same day. There was a load of trees being taken down around, so the bowling green just down from St Mags. I drove past it and I was like, oh, I wonder if they're chipping that. And then I got to St Mags, got to the church, and there was an email from Sam saying, you might want to go and approach the people and see. Anyway, went down, and they've dropped off probably 5 or 6 truckloads of wood chip for us, which is brilliant. Considerable saving on the budget that we would have had to have spent on on that sort of thing. I've used it for a few things so far. So marking out a few different beds as a bit of a weed suppressant. Going to be using that for a path. So if you're in the car park and you're looking down the northern side of the church where you have the big ventilator box, down along there's going to be a path all the way down into the behind the church in the garden. I'd like to use the wood chip there. Originally, I'd thought about using gravel, and in fact, this is one of the things I will say, that the plan that I originally did back sort of end of last summer, I've adapted it quite a lot as we've gone on, simply as I've got to know the garden a bit better, and also certain things have changed. Other things, I suppose, I've not made any huge sweeping changes, but things like, why we might as well use the wood chip. I think it's much more sustainable to have something like that and use what we've got for free than going out and buying loads of gravel to do that. So, and it's having struck up that relationship with those people, they're more than happy to deliver it whenever we like, which is wonderful. So we've got a sort of a ready supply to top it up whenever it needs it as well. The other thing with that is, and I didn't talk very much about this, but involving lots of different groups of people. So not just the volunteers that we'll have from the church itself, hopefully, but we've had people so far from Leonard Stocks, the homeless and rehabilitation centre down the road. I work at Brunel Academy, which is a pupil referral unit, and I was chatting with them yesterday, and I'm hoping to get at least one and hopefully 2 young men that are, come from some quite disadvantaged backgrounds, and they're challenging, but they're really, I think they're wonderful young men, and I'd really love to have them involved. And so I'm hoping to lead some work experience in the garden for them as well, and really try and enthuse them a little bit about, both, particularly one, but both of them are not the sort of young people that like sitting in a classroom learning. They learn in a sort of a different environment much better and much more hands-on. So I think hopefully it can enthuse them for, perhaps career and work further down the line. Hoping to time the youth offending team, although I've not managed, unfortunately, to connect with them yet. I've tried, but I think my experience of this whole period of time with COVID, it's changed a lot of things. Unfortunately, we've lots of people that perhaps I would have liked to have got involved earlier. It's not been possible to do so, but coming out of that now, hopefully for extended period, we can hopefully get more people involved and push forward that sort of thing. Really. But yeah, sorry about the young men. They can do a lot more of the carting of wood chip. I'm feeling my back's feeling it at the moment. So.
Lyndon, we had spoken about edging for the beds, and we were debating, what we could afford, what wouldn't get nicked in terms of logs and sleepers and stone and that kind of thing. But actually, with such a supply of wood chip, that's kind of doing it for us, isn't it?
I would like to use it on a lot of beds, because wood chip's great. It has a couple of different functions. So I think I mentioned earlier, if you just leave bare soil, the nature will repair soil, and one of the ways that it does that is all of the seeds within the seed bank basically will germinate and cover. It retains moisture. That's a really key thing. So by covering with wood chip, you actually help to retain moisture within the soil. It helps to keep the soil. If you imagine it's full of all sorts of microorganisms and fungi, as soil dries out, a lot of those things will, don't fare very well in that. And often, or the other side of it is if you get lots and lots of rain that leaches out soil. So having something holding it together on top of it can actually really help to keep the soil where it is, or stop it getting leached out. It also suppresses the weeds coming up, which is, I suppose, from a maintenance point of view, is a useful thing. It won't stop it, and you do still need to do weeding, and you do still need to occasionally water, but it will have beneficial effects in that. If I do sort of edge and put onto beds in that sort of thing as well. Yeah.
Lyndon, you talked about composting earlier on. Have you got the bins? Where are you with the composting?
I was chatting to Aiken the other day from Leonard Stocks, and he is really keen to work with some of the people from Leonard Stocks to actually build those. And they want to use recycled wood, so looking at things like pallets. The design is a three-bayed compost heap. Right. So start off with the first one, you start off with the middle one, and once that becomes full, you then move to the first one, and turn the middle one into the third one, and then you do basically it's a process of turning one into the other, and then so that it mixes nicely and rots down. And by the time you've used all three of them, one of them is ready to then put out onto the garden. So it's quite a nice little system to do. So they will go down within the sort of woodland area, down towards the bottom of the where the council offices are at the back. Yeah, they'll be sited down there.
That's good.
I wonder if we could draw on people's collective experience. One of the things that we have spoken about is having a place where we can store tools safely. At the moment, they're being stored in the bell tower room, which in the course of time we'd like to reclaim and use for other purposes. But we've spoken about everything from sheds to small containers, kind of tucked down the back there, out of sight. just needs to be secure, but then it's just easy to get to rather than. If anyone's got any experience of safe storage of we're not talking lots of electrical tools, it's just lots of hand tools and wheelbarrows and that kind of thing. Yeah, let us know. If anyone's got any experience.
As I said, I've not had to consider that sort of thing personally before in such an urban setting. I've had sheds and things, but I'm aware that sort of other projects, the Dan Best up at Cricket Fields has had his shed broken into on a number of occasions and tools pinched. So yeah, something quite secure would be your suggestion, Sam, I think a while back was like a container, a metal container, and they're probably not that pretty, but you could perhaps make it look nicer, clad it, or
we've got a few creative people we could set on that to make it look good.
Grow something over it.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone said, Margaret, contact Darren Cowell for free pallets. Thank you. That's great. I will write his name down right now.
Marshalls, I don't know your first name. I'm so sorry.
Who's that?
Katie. Thanks for your message, Katie. Lyndon, I think you'd be the first to say that everybody's welcome. There's a real mix of people who it looks like are going to be coming down, which is fantastic. I'd say so long as you're okay with that mix and different backgrounds and stuff, which we love at Mags, then yeah, you'd be really welcome.
Absolutely. We just, with all of the surrounding COVID at the moment, we're making sure, keeping our distance. I think it's really nice to have it as a social thing as well, though, to make sure, what I don't want is one person here and one person there and one person there. I'd like there to be a real social element to this, even if it is at a little bit of a distance. But yeah, provided you're comfortable with that. And as I said, there's such a range of different things to get involved with, from really light stuff to very, very, moving big things around. So really, you kind of pick and choose whatever you prefer to get involved with. And but yeah, absolutely welcome. And your daughter as well. Sorry, you haven't said daughter. Daughter or
Thank you. He's my son, Jacob.
Sorry.
Are most people that are on the presentation from St. Mags?
No, we're from Vale, but we get involved with St. Mags on occasions.
My husband and I attend Teignmouth Baptist Church. My husband's parents go to Upton Vale, Sue and Mike Marshall. So yes, it's nice to see. And obviously we live in Paynton, so it's been nice to serve in the local community. Sometimes going to Teignmouth is a bit far. So I just felt that God was speaking to me for this presentation. So I thought I had to join. So it's nice to see everybody and see what's going on in the local area.
Lovely.
About 8 of us on at the moment are from St. Mags, and then there's others, friends in the community, friends from Glow, where Lyndon worships, Chris and Damien, and yeah. Simon, I don't know how you know Lyndon, but you're obviously mates.
Glow as well.
Glow as well, yeah. Either that or you're just keeping track of him.
Yeah.
It's one of the other people within we have little communities within Glow, so we're part of a community together, and he has an awful lot of experience of this sort of thing as well, having run a would you say it was small holding, Simon?
Small holding, really, yeah.
Yeah, although it wasn't that small, so yeah,
not really farming, so small holding, yeah.
Also, if you come along, Katie, there's drinks, and we had tonic tea cakes last week and biscuits as well. So I'm sure your little boy will like that.
Can I just say, you were talking about the work that was done in that's been going on in Upton Park, The very far end of the park, by the coach station, there's been quite a bit of clearance there, and we're hoping in the autumn to get native edible hedging going in where they've replaced the fence. And also there's space now, we'd like to put a mini community orchard in there.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's really, really.
And that sort of links with that. We've got our little pollinator garden on the other side of the road, but yeah, so in round where the eucalyptus trees are, which who knows who planted eucalyptus trees in an English urban park, but hey.
Well, they want to find giant sequoias down the
Oh, don't talk to me about them.
Like, don't get me wrong, I love sequoia. In fact, my daughter's middle name is Sequoia, but it's not something I would be planting. There are some interesting.
They planted 3 beside the where the big tree came out next to the bowling club. So there's 3 there on that corner.
They are a tremendous tree, and their root system is not something I would want anywhere near a road, basically.
Or a building or a bowling green. But hey, you know, we're not going to be around when they're big enough to cause problems. My granddaughter's called Hazel after the hazel tree.
Lovely, fantastic. Well, I'm Lyndon after the linden tree. In fact, I discovered sat underneath the linden tree. So the tree is spelled Linden, and I was sat underneath it. It was Landsco Festival, and there's a woman picking the blossom of the linden tree, and I got chatting to her, and she said that my name, the spelling of my name, is one who sits under the linden tree. Lots of tree names, anyway. I'm just trying to look down through this just to see if there is any more questions. If I've missed anyone, and if I haven't answered anything, please do shout. I'd be more than happy to. There's quite a lot of comments here. It's wonderful. Thank you. So Alison was floodlights lighting up the church spire. Is that a problem for the moths? Okay, there's different thoughts to this. So the way that we used to catch the moths to monitor them was using a floodlight. So, or it was using a lamp, and they are attracted to it. Then they fly in, and then they into a big box basically, and they then hide underneath egg boxes. But so moths are attracted to, they navigate by the moon, and they believe it's to do with that. But the problem is that often if they bash against the lamps, and that can cause damage. Their wings damage very easily. So potentially is a problem. The other thing is that then you also, they're very visible to predators. So although most moths are predated by bats, so they don't use they're not using sight, but you tend to get more of a concentration of moths around a lamp. So yeah, they're basically easy pickings. At the same time, having lights in the church garden, I think, is quite important. So from the perspective of antisocial behaviour and things, you don't necessarily want a completely dark site, because, well, you know, who knows what's then I think it almost attracts that sort of thing into there. So I would say that it's perhaps not ideal, but at the same time it's perhaps a compromise that you need to have in that respect. It's not across the whole site at the moment as well, is it? So there's still plenty of other habitat there that is suitable.
And I've not noticed lots of moth activity in when it's been lit. I haven't specifically looked for it, but it's the kind of thing that I would have noticed if there was lots of. So, yeah, because it's the roadside mainly.
You will notice it more so all the different plants that are in there will start to attract more species, I would imagine. But so that might become more of a problem as more wildlife is attracted to the garden. But as I said, I think it's our cities are full of lights anyway, and in many senses, they're, you know, it's I know it is a bright one, but there are so many lights that I think that is not a huge problem. I might be wrong though. I so yeah.
Brian looks like he's limbering up for a question.
Right, you have a question. Looks like you're perhaps up.
Yeah. Sorry, Lyndon, there were a couple of questions. One was about the underplanting. You know, you said very usefully under certain types of plants, companion planting and underplanting is helpful. It might be useful at some point to have some lists of those for our own garden, but also to know what would be useful to you in the garden you're planting.
Really cool. I'll come back to that. Did you say you've got a second question?
Yeah, the other question was about lighting, and I was just thinking about discouraging antisocial behaviour around the church at night, and whether low-level UV lights on the ground or around the back of the church would be useful, like they use in toilets, and whether that would affect the plants and the moths and all those things.
I don't know. So UV lights, I don't think would affect moths so much. I believe, and I'm not sure, they've stopped using them in blues, and I'm not sure why that is. Yeah, I don't know, if I'm honest. But yeah, there probably needs to be some conversations around lighting at the back of the church, because that tends to be the area, because it's less obvious, where most of the sort of paraphernalia and stuff is found, is behind there. So yeah, that potentially is a conversation we do need to have, but I'm not sure if UV lights are the right thing to do or not. But it's, yeah, very good question. From the first question you said about the underplanting, one of the things that I've done a lot of is what's called green manure. So I've planted lots of plants. I would say they're temporary plants. So I've planted clover and vetch across a lot of the plant beds. So if you go in there, you'll notice one of the fruit tree beds is absolutely covered in little green plants about that big. They serve a number of different purposes. So first of all, having them there reduces the number of other weeds that are going to be coming up. But clover and vetch are part of the legume family, so peas and beans and all that sort of thing. Their root systems have what are called rhizomes on them, so they have a symbiotic relationship with particular bacteria, and they allow nitrogen to be converted into a form that the plants are able to uptake properly, rather than atmospheric nitrogen. So what you do is you grow the plants up, then you chop them down, and it releases all the nitrogen into the soil. So that is one ground cover that I'm using, but it's more of a temporary ground cover. Just as I'm starting to establish the beds, it will help. It helps, as I said, with weed suppression, but it is also helping to, not that we need to add more nutrition to the soil, but it's for more permanent ground cover. There are all sorts of different things you can use. I think my favorites are things like, I think I mentioned earlier, Korean raspberry. It's like a creeping, it's like a bramble, but it's not as invasive as a bramble, and it tends to just sort of spread out. And what's nice about it is it fruits. So you get these tiny little raspberries on a kind of a ground level, and they're shade tolerant. So again, you can plant all sorts of things around them, and you'll still get the fruit. Or other things like creeping thyme is an interesting one. That again just spreads out across, and it's very fragrant, very, very, very good for pollinators, particularly when it comes into flower. It brings in all sorts of things into there. But yeah, I can certainly talk you through a list of different things that you'd be able to use in your garden. If you perhaps if we had a conversation, you sort of told me what you've already got there, or I can come and have a look and and sort of give you some hints of sort of things that might be useful for that. Yeah. We're coming up to about 9:25. I didn't think I'd talk for this long. So people who know me realise I probably could do that quite easily. If anyone's got any final, I don't know, questions, comments, anything like that, we're really happy to answer or hear what you got. And if not, we'll perhaps call it an evening, I think.
Been really interesting, Lyndon. Thank you ever so much. I learned stuff that I felt I should have known in the first place because you wrote a lot about it, but it's great that it's kind of moving on and it's progressing as you're learning more about the area and so on. So no, it's great fun to be down there on a Tuesday as well. So thanks ever so much.
Good to see you last week. And as I said, anybody who does want to get involved, you don't have to commit to sort of every week or anything like that. You can just drop in, and any help is always welcome. But thanks, Alison.
It's just good on so many levels. It's great for the town centre. I think it's already improving how people use the grounds. It's great relationally, both just people linking in with each other in what's been quite an isolating period, and making new friendships, and it's good for people's mental health. And it's beautiful. And what was just literally some trees and grass with just a handful of plants is now starting to take shape. And actually, it's become more than, I think, Alison, Ali, and Nick, and I, and the others kind of could anticipate. So we're really grateful, and grateful to the National Lottery Heritage Fund as well, that have enabled it to happen. This is one of the streams, alongside the stuff that we did to the roof, and creative art stuff, and exhibitions, and Victorian fairs. And we've got, in fact, just whilst we think of it, on this Saturday we've got Meet the Experts, where it's a panel of different experts on history and architecture, and the history of the church and of Upton and the Torquay. Again, that's one of the events. And another thing I'm really excited about is the Rich and the Pure, which has been a kind of collaboratively written. Brian and Ros know much more about this than I do, but well, it's kind of feature-length film that's been filmed in and around St Mags and different people's houses and back streets of Torquay with full camera gear. And I know Steph and others who have been part of this are starring in it and do a fantastic job. So it's great. It's good to see things going on. And from my perspective, anything that builds relationship with folk and brings them into the life of the church and then into the life of God is going to be a good thing. So thank you.
I think I just want to add, what I don't see this is as something nice this year that then, that was lovely. This is something that I really want for as long as needed, but I really would love it if we get a group of people. It doesn't have to be the people from the church, but people coming in who want to start taking, understanding the garden, but then taking their own approach to how it's, how it evolves over time and becomes something that is, a real sort of, a focal point for the church. That I don't see it just as a short-term thing anyway. Something that will develop over the years, hopefully, into something really beautiful.
I think we value the across the churches feeling of this is the church community in Torbay, and it gives us a chance to meet with each other and share the shared enthusiasm for the Lord and for the projects in Torquay. It's got to be better, hasn't it? And we really appreciate being able to join in. Thank you.
we've got just represented in this one call. It's lovely. It really is. And I found this last year has been, I've met so many more people from these sort of things that I didn't know before. And so I know there's been many negatives, but there has been some real positive coming together during this period. And I hope coming out of that we can, hold on to those relationships that have been built and new connections, and take that to I'm really hopeful of that.
Great. Well, I am going to finish the recording now. And so if you're watching this later, I hope you enjoyed it. Do get in touch with myself or Lyndon or Nick and Ali if you've got any questions. So I'm just, God bless you guys.